Hello, it's Amy, and I'm back talking about the memoirs of Casanova. I've just finished reading chapter one, and I quite liked it so far. This translation is very accessible. It's written in, a clear and concise and enjoyable way, and I'm sure it's, Casanova's original writing style coming through in the translation. The book was originally written in French. It's a French language book, and this is obviously an English translation. And I can't say for sure who translated my edition because the name of the translator is absent. Unfortunately, I find that to be common with older books. They would often omit the name of the translator entirely, and I think it's because it wasn't seen as quite as important for some books as it's seen today. If it was a popular book, the publisher would often just issue it without the translator's name on it at all, and you can probably assume that maybe they got paid a flat rate, or if they were getting paid royalties, it was behind the scenes. But it's quite possible, and probably more than likely, that this is the Arthur Machen translation. Arthur Machen translated it probably a decade or so. Actually, probably more than that. But he would have translated it within his lifetime, and he was active in the 1890s, 1910s. Writing his own works and also translating a number of works, one of them being the Memoirs of Casanova. And so I would assume this edition from the 1920s is quite likely the Arthur Machen translation. But we begin chapter one with Casanova's early life, and he tells us about a few of his ancestors, pinpointing, I guess, the ones he finds most impressive, including one who sailed with Christopher Columbus. But that's not really the important part. He spends a few sentences, a paragraph or two on that. But then tells us about his parents. And his father was an actor who married. Unfortunately, his first wife passed on, and he married a second time the daughter of a shoemaker, who is, of course, Casanova's mother. And as he says, 9 months or so after the marriage of his mother and father, he was born. His mother, although she had been a shoemaker, joined in her husband's occupation and became an actress. And so in his young life, both his parents were on the stage. Unfortunately, his father did die at quite a young age, in his late 30s. Leaving his wife and two young sons when Casanova was only about 7 years old. And one of his dying wishes that his wife, made in front of witnesses was that his children would not grow up on the stage, so they would not be actors. They would go on to pursue a different occupation. And so his mother, Casanova's mother, left the stage. And although, as Casanova said, she had many other offers of marriage, she decided not to remarry and to go it on her own with her sons. And that is how his life began. But for Casanova himself, he says his first memory is of being 8 years old and getting a bloody nose. Standing in a corner of the house and just feeling, the blood running down from his nose, his grandmother finding him and whisking him off to a woman that he describes as a witch. So some sort of non-conventional or folk medicine woman of some sorts, who's going to, do some rituals, perform some spells, and provide some herbal remedies and unconventional treatments He describes being put into a box by this woman, being closed in this box with his bleeding nose, and hearing all sorts of conversation and some sort of chanting or rituals on the outside, being stripped naked and put in a bed and having oils rubbed on him. And this woman that he describes as a witch, this witch, telling him that he's not to tell anyone what's happened, and as long as he doesn't tell anyone what's happened, he will be cured, and that there will be a woman who will visit his bedroom the next night. But if he tells anyone that this woman visited, then he will, die. But as long as he keeps silent, he's going to recover because of these rituals and this treatment. And so it's this very mystical beginning to his story. And the fact that he zeroed in on this as his first memory, almost, it tells us as the reader that this is not going to be a conventional Christian story, so to speak. This is a very, un-Catholic first memory, going to this witch for treatment. And, thankfully, he does recover from this illness. It seemed to have been like an ongoing illness. It was more than just a bloody nose, it was ongoing. He was significantly weakened, and though he doesn't get too much into it, you get the impression that he was, an ill, weak child who wasn't expected to do very much, wasn't expected to be very intelligent. But upon recovering from this illness, he learns to read and excels very quickly. He tells us a few other things about himself in this very short chapter. Some stories that don't reflect very well on him, some things that are pretty unflattering. He presents us with an early memory, probably one of the only memories of his childhood. He presents this memory of, and now I'm suddenly wondering if I got the years mixed up, because I think this memory I'm thinking of, he said that he was 7, but then he said his other memory with the bloody nose was when he was 8. Maybe he was 6 with the bloody nose. Let me no, he said he was 8 with the bloody nose. First memory he can furnish. There is, so that's the first memory he can furnish. So he's 8 there. So he must have been a little bit older when his father died, because the next memory is with his brother in his father's room. And let's see. He makes some note of his father's so his father was 36 when he died. Okay, so his father died when he was 8, not when he was 7. So it's a memory just a few weeks before his father's death. And he says, the next thing I remember is being with my brother Francois in my father's room. A large crystal lying on the table attracted my fancy, and I put it in my pocket. By and by my father got up to look for the crystal, and not finding it, he naturally accused us of taking it. My brother denied this, and so did I, whereupon my father said we should be searched, and the one in whose possession it was found should have a good beating. And knowing full well that whoever's pocket is going to be found in is going to get a beating, he, makes a show of looking about the room for it, and in the process of doing this, he slips it into his brother's pocket, which of course leads to it being found in his brother's pocket, and his brother getting the beating that I guess in a way was owed to him. Not that he should, or either of them should have been beaten, but it wasn't his brother's beating to take. And he remembers this, and he actually has the kind of audacity to tell us that later on he told his brother about this several years later, and that his brother had never been able to forgive him for that incident. And I guess it would be quite hard, the fact that their father died shortly afterwards, that probably one of his brother's last memories of their father was getting this beating for something that he didn't do. And so I think that says a lot about Casanova's character. He's willing to, put others in a difficult position to get out of his own predicament. Even at that young age of 8. And we go back to the preface where he says that he forgets things, he never forgives, but it's not clear whether he apologizes, because it's not exactly an apology when he speaks to his brother. He doesn't offer an apology. What he does is sort of tell it as almost as if like, remember that would happen. What a funny story. Which I think says a lot about him. And we have a few other stories here as well, where he talks about stealing food. Now, to be fair, he's undernourished and underfed in this boarding house where he's at. And so stealing these sausages and whatnot from the kitchen and eggs from the yard, perhaps that's not too much of a crime, but he openly admits to this theft of food. And not just that, but he openly admits to extorting his classmates where he's studying to get food and treats from them, to the point where they feel as though they're being extorted and they complain, and he gets in a bit of trouble because he's such a good student. He's been put in charge of essentially looking over the work of his peers and assigning grades, and he's set up this system where the poorer students, the ones who aren't doing so well, give him a little something to eat, and he maybe bumps up their grades or bumps up his feedback on their assignment. And you do that enough and you demand enough, and of course the other kids are going to get a little perturbed with you. But the fact that in this short few pages, it's a very short chapter. Let's see, it's only, I think it's less than 10 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 8 pages. Within 8 pages, he's told us, 3 or 4 pretty unflattering stories about himself. But he also tells us a few things that I think we're meant to sort of idolize in him. One of them, about how good a student he is, how this priest he goes to study with, shortly after his father's death, he's sent away to study in, I think it's the city of Pua, and he's sent there to stay with this woman. His grandmother drops him off, pays 6 months board in advance, and it's very poor conditions. He's undernourished. He's sleeping in a room with rodents of all sorts. It's implied that, maybe rats, lice, that sort of thing, possibly even bed bugs. He's sent to stay there, and he goes to study with a local priest. And he tells us, how well he did, what a great student he was, how intelligent he was, and how the priest came to like him so much that, seeing the conditions he was living in, he was invited to come and live with the priest and his family. And in living with them, he met Bettina, the priest's 13-year-old sister, who he describes here as his first love. There's not a lot of detail here, but he does say that he nursed her through smallpox, and actually says that he owes some of the pox scars on his own body to the fact that he nursed Bettina, his first love, through the smallpox and presumably back to health. Although he then comments, how sad it was that she had, an unhappy marriage, and it ended up going back to her brother, and kind of died unhappy. But that's his first mention of a love affair of any kind. We aren't told just how far it went. You would presume, it wasn't too much of a thing, given that he was living in her household with her brother. And you would expect that, as a young man learning from a priest, he would have some sense of social norms, decorum, and respect. But he does mention her as his first love. But then he presents us with his first, well, not his first vice, because we've already seen that he's willing to lie and extort. He presents us with another vice, and that is the desire to be seen as at level with his more wealthy peers. And so he becomes a doctor. He registers as a doctor of law at the age of 16. He says he would have preferred medicine, but his mother has chosen law for him. And he's, associating with these people of a higher social standing, people who have more wealth and are used to a richer lifestyle. And he really wants to fit in with them. He doesn't want to be seen as an outsider. And so he adopts the spending habits of his friends. And of course gets in some debt, doesn't know what to do, writes a letter to his grandmother, and his grandmother shows up, presumably pays his debts. That's not mentioned, but that's, presumably she does, because she wouldn't just leave those debts unpaid. But the consequence is that he has to leave Padua and is forced to return to Venice with his grandmother. And so that is where we leave him here. And the next chapter here is titled Lucy of Picenum. I'm going to assume this is, another one of his loves. And then clerical aspirations, because in studying law, it was also indicated that his mother wanted him to get involved in the ecclesiastical profession in some manner, so get involved with the church. And I have to say, I'm quite enjoying this so far. I really like the writing style. I really like how we're being eased into the story, and I like some of the subtext about his character that's been revealed so early on. And I think what it's indicating we're going to see in terms of his social life and some of his issues and barriers and vices later on. So I'll see you next time with maybe 2 chapters at once, most likely. If you've read the Memoirs of Casanova, be sure to leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts.